Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible and editor of the digital newsletter Winespeed. And this is episode 4 in our 4-part series on the great wines of Rutherford, the final episode. So I am really glad you're here. If you've joined us for all of the other ones, welcome back. And if this is your first time, it will still be so incredible, you'll see. And I hope you're tasting along with us. So tonight's Rutherford tasting is called Rutherford's Signature Alluvial and Volcanic Soils. And of course, we're going to talk about soil and flavor. You know, for most of us, it seems logical, I guess I'll say, that a significant aspect of how a wine tastes has to relate to soil. And yet, geologists caution us against making direct links between a specific soil type and a specific flavor. We'll see what our panelists think. So let me tell you who's here with us. Rebekah Wineburg, there she is. Hi, Rebekah, is the winemaker of Quintessa. And Rory Williams is a viticultural consultant to Julie Williams of Sabores. Julie also happens to be his lucky mother. So it's a family business. Before we begin, Rory and Rebekah, I want to just quickly, if you don't mind, put up a map of Rutherford, because to love wine means you love maps. You want to remember where everything is. So let's just quickly throw up this general map of the Napa Valley and its AVAs. And you see Rutherford there, really right in the heart of the Napa Valley. Just north of Oakville and south of St. Helena, spanning the entire valley from east to west. It's a very small place, only 6 square miles, but extremely diverse viticulturally. So there are, you know, when I think about Rutherford, there are volcanic soils, mostly on the eastern side, and there are sedimentary soils, mostly on the western side. There are benches and uplifts. There are alluvial fans, fluvial soils from the river swelling, the river that goes right through, the Napa River that goes right through Rutherford. In short, it's amazingly diverse. So let's talk about that. But first, I want, for everyone who may not know, I'd like each of you to talk about your estates. So Rebekah, I want to start with you, because Quintessa on the eastern side of Rutherford, along the Silverado Trail, was one of the first estates in the Napa Valley to be completely biodynamic. Tell us a little bit about the history of Quintessa.
Yeah, you're correct. So Quintessa is an organic and biodynamic estate on the eastern side of Rutherford. We encompass 280 acres in total and we span from the Silverado Trail all the way to the Napa River. What is special about Quintessa is that a lot of things, actually. So there's the geology. Quintessa is on the valley floor, but contains 3 ridges of hills that correlate to changes in the geology, changes in the soil types. And so within this one estate, you have a diversity of terroir. And terroir also, and soils, encompasses people and vision too. So when you mentioned the biodynamic estate, Quintessa was founded in 1989 by Augustin and Valerie Huneeus. And before it became Quintessa, it is a piece of land that had never been farmed before. So it's an amazing opportunity to envision something new and to start clean. And from the very beginning, from 1989, they made the decision that they would be organic. So no synthetic chemicals have ever been used on the property, and that none of the native oak woodlands would be cut down. So Quintessa is now 150 acres of vineyard, and the remaining part of the property is the native oak woodlands and the lake.
Just an astounding fact to have found really on the floor of the Napa Valley, or at least close to the floor of Napa Valley, an untouched, in a sense, virgin piece of ground. Rory, let's go to you. And I want to apologize to everyone. I just misspoke. I said Julie Williams. And Julie's name is Julie Johnson. I think when I met her, she might have been Julie Williams, and we're old friends. So Julie Johnson of Tres Sabores, and you must be the luckiest guy in the country to have her as your mother. Although I'm sure she's quite a demanding boss. Tell us a little bit about Tres Sabores.
Yeah, so Tres Sabores, just a little really micro estate in essence. And, first and foremost for me, it's home. It's where I grew up. I moved there with my parents when I was 3 years old and grew up on the ranch. And it is interwoven really into why I'm back in Napa making wine, why I have a love of vineyards and a love of making wines of terroir and being a part of that whole history. Tres Sabores on the western side of the valley, really on technically benchland. It's right up against the Mayacamas Hills, the western mountain chain in Napa, in Rutherford, at the very top notch of an alluvial fan. And I'm sure we'll get more into what that exactly means. But if you can imagine a canyon kind of slowly tapering right into the hillside, Tres Sabores sits there right at the top of that notch. And because given that position in an alluvial fan, but so close up to the mountains, we have, even in this tiny little 9-acre vineyard, only about 3 of which is planted to Cabernet Sauvignon. So, and the Cabernet that you're trying tonight is just exclusively from that little 3-acre piece. We get a pretty broad diversity of soil, even because of how close it is notched to the mountain. In the center of the rows, which span the mouth of this canyon, you get these kind of deep alluvial soils. And on either side, you have kind of what you might call the nascent alluvium, the recently fallen rocks of rhyolite, of volcanic soil, kind of crashing into the edge of the vineyard. And so as you go across, it's very frustrating as a viticulturalist actually to have this row that's totally different at either end than it is in the middle. But that's what makes it really special. And my mom, having spent the majority of her life at this point on this ranch, has really become in tune with taking this little 3-acre piece and chopping it up into 9 different picks and multiple different fermentations, really trying to find what tastes like home to us. Just a little history of the ranch. We moved there in 1987. Julie Williams, as she used to be known, she and my dad bought the ranch in 87. It was the original ranch for the first ranch that Frog's Leap ever farmed. My mom and dad co-founded Frog's Leap together. And it was the first vineyard that we took organic at Frog's Leap, and we certified it in 1989. And it's been dry farmed and organic, so non-irrigated and organic ever since then. The Cabernet vines were planted in 1972, so they're coming up on 50 years in the ground, and are, sort of those gentle giant, wide spacing California sprawl, a very old school kind of vineyard. But they're wines that have spoken to me my entire life. And so I'm very, very excited to share them.
How beautifully said. One of the things that you both have in common is, in fact, a very long and passionate commitment to regenerative farming and by extension, I think in Rebekah's case, biodynamics, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I want to see, Rory, let me stay with you for a second, because I'd like you to define alluvial fan and benchland, because these two viticultural terms are so critical to understanding Rutherford wine. And I do my best, but you're a viticulturalist. So can you define those two terms for us?
Yeah, so, alluvial fan especially, I think, is essential to understanding the landscape of Napa Valley. Where the river is, even in the valley, is defined by these alluvial fans pushing the river against one way or the other. And a lot of the really classic soils, especially of the valley floor, are defined by these alluvial fans. Alluvial fan essentially just being deep soil, often flecked with lots of gravel and stones. Alluvium being the term for rocky material that is washed out of the mountainsides by the kinds of storms. We had a massive storm here about a week and a half ago, And I've been told that the storms that actually cause alluvial fans are about 100 times more stronger than that one. Really
Wow.
kind of literal 1,000-year storms, which to us feel like they never happen. Obviously, in the geological time span happen all the time. And the kinds of storms that rip rocks off of mountains eventually do that, and those rocks tumble down and eventually get smaller and smaller and work their way out. And in those flows, and I think essential to understanding how alluvial fans are not just uniform, that they, if you imagine a river in a big rain event, how it doesn't just all go one direction in exactly the same. You have eddies and swirls and gravel banks and silt piling up here, and oops, it gets trapped against a bunch of trees over there. The same thing kind of happens on a macro scale in Napa, where you have alluvial fans that have little individual elements to them, where a little more silt is piled up, a little more gravel, a little more sand. And those kinds of things are what make Napa not easily reducible to just the kind of overhead soil, the USGS soils maps that you can pull off of the internet, but instead really require boots on the ground. And it's what drives the passion, I think, of a lot of viticulturalists here, is starting to, I really feel like we're in a golden age of starting to piece that apart and being able to make sense of it and create wines of distinction as a result.
Indeed, we are. Hold on to benchlands for a second, because I want to bring Rebekah in here, because these alluvial fans happen on both sides of the valley. And to some extent, I remember the very first time a viticulturalist told me that tops of mountains were thrown onto the valley floor, and parts of the valley floor were thrown up onto mountains. I mean, it's an astounding idea. And that happens, that's true over at the Quintessa property as well. Rebekah, tell us.
Yeah, I mean, the geology of Napa Valley is so interesting and so exciting. And I really love what Rory said, that we're in this golden age of understanding and focusing on it, and so that we can understand our wines. Over on the eastern side of Napa Valley in Rutherford, where Quintessa is, we are that perfect example of all these kind of things that can happen. We have these hills on the property. And how do you end up with hills on the valley floor? So Quintessa is nestled just at the base of the Vaca mountain range. Well, these mountain ranges in the Mayacamas on the western side and the Vaca on the eastern side got pushed up and happened, geologically speaking, in a very short amount of time. These are young volcanics, and they were volcanically active, very energetic, but for a very short period of time. So this all pushed up really fast. There was volcanic flow over. That's where we get this rhyolitic soil, that white volcanic ash, obsidian and quartz. These are all volcanic soils. But because this moved up so fast, there was also a point, and this is Quintessa, where the Vaca mountain range couldn't handle its own weight and angle, and there was a massive landslide off of the mountain. That's the eastern hill of Quintessa. That's this white soil that is the pure rhyolitic ash, and matches the same soils that you find on the top of the Vaca mountain range in Pritchard Hill and parts of Howell Mountain. But then what's so interesting is that when this massive landslide happened, so big, it's so massive, that the earth behind it acts like water and ripples up. It had to go somewhere. So it rippled up into what we locally call toe hills. So these hillsides, these ripples on the valley floor. And they tell the story of mixed alluvium. So some story of water movement, of a big, massive water movement, because the cobbles that we see here are bigger than my head. So think about the power of that water that had to drop that, carry that and drop that rock out, and mix it with volcanics. And then you follow to the Napa River as it is today, and where it flows and how it affects what we call the valley floor, the benchlands for us that we call it. So it's I mean, you can't tell, I get very excited about this.
I know I think it's exciting. Anyone who loves wine, eventually you fall in love with geology, right? Because it's just so it's so impressive and such a big overwhelming feeling of how nature causes wine regions to be what they are. That said, though, I want to go into the tasting now, and I promise I won't forget about benchlands, but I want to go into the tasting. And Rory, we're going to start with your Tres Sabores first, because even though we know so much about geology, certainly not everything, but especially it seems to me the last 20 years has been a really pivotal period of time in understanding geology. Still, it's pretty hard to associate what we believe happened geologically with given flavors. Or correct me if I'm wrong, as you tell us about this wine.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, sometimes assumed, or it's very tempting to be able to draw a one-to-one line. Well, if you have this type of soil, you'll have exactly this kind of flavor. But of course, it's really hard to draw one-to-one connections that way. I think that it ties in with age of vines, with exactly how these vines decide to grow in this piece of soil, and how you manage the soil that's on top of, you know, the part that you have access to, the first 12 inches or so. What kind of cover crops are you planting? Things like that are designed to hopefully draw out distinctions in soil that manifest. I always hesitate to try and tie a specific soil type to a specific flavor or anything like that. I'm more interested in the idea that when you get this incredible diversity of soil, you're looking to push the heterogeneity of a wine, the way that the differences that a wine can manifest in flavor, and that those can be in very subtle ways. You know, the edges of this vineyard, what we call cab edge, tend towards that are very shallow soils, almost entirely volcanic. Do they taste like lava? Well, I don't know. I don't eat lava regularly, but it's but they do have a kind of, you know, it's easy to anthropomorphize maybe some of the flavors, but they do have this kind of stoniness to it, and they do have certainly a lot more tannin. They tend to ripen a lot quicker, so your window for maintaining natural acidity in the wine is much lower. So there tend to be wines of bigger power, but in certain years can be a little bit awkward if you get it, you know, if you're just slightly off. Whereas the wines in the center of in the centers of these rows, the wines that come off from these are usually much bigger vines, a lot more fruity, much more subtle flavors, can get a little bit more of the floral character that I love out of these wines when they are allowed to fully develop. And it's those kinds of differences that you discover as a winemaker. They're not about me going in there and say, or my mom going in there and say, well, we want this flavor, so we're going to do this. You can do that. We have the technology, but that's not very interesting to me. And I'm more interested to just see, you know, hey, let's take, you know, maybe this is the year where these volcanic soils and the power that comes out of them is really going to shine because it's a cool year or something like that. Whereas maybe we really, really value the freshness of these larger, you know, more productive vines in the centers of the rows that have the shading and the resources available to them to make it through a very hot, very stressful summer or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they can preserve the finesse of a wine and preserve the balance, and importantly, the diversity of flavor that is ultimately the goal of the wine. Because if I had to put a term to it, I really value that kind of dried herbs, the floral, top notey floral notes that in Cabernet Sauvignon. That's what reminds me of home with this wine, and is really what we tend to value.
Let's hold this wine up so that the camera can see it. This is the Tres Sabores Perspective Cabernet 2018. And your comments about freshness and a kind of dried herb character, especially I think in the Western hills where there's so much forest around and above you. You get all that bay leaf and dry California forest, beautiful, beautiful smell. If you've ever hiked up in the mountains around Napa Valley, and if you haven't, you must come and do that. These smells are the smells of this wine.
Yeah, the wild carrot, the bay leaf, the manzanita, it's our own version of Garrigue, and it is pretty intoxicating in the middle of summer when you're out there checking on the vines, maybe late in the day after things cool down, and you get this tremendous aromatic quality. And for me, that's what develops long-term into things that really drive distinction as a wine ages. I love the way that those kind of dried herb and floral elements play out over time. So we don't shy away from them, that's for sure.
Definitely not. They are very attractive. Let's go to, in terms of our tasting, to the Quintessa. Let me hold the Quintessa up so that people can see the label. There it is. And this is also 2018. Tell us about this wine, Rebekah.
So, the 2018 Quintessa and 2018 vintage, I think for all of us was a really beautiful vintage because Mother Nature was generous and she was mild. And so it allowed us to understand, to observe how the vines are reacting in as Rory said, these very subtle differences in our vineyards. I can't say that word. The diversity.
That was pretty amazing.
That was really amazing.
Heterogeneity of flavor.
Heterogeneity.
I'm like, okay, I'm going to steal that idea.
I know. I write it down, but I'm like, oh, I said it earlier today and I couldn't do it. But the diversity of our soils. When you have a year like 2018, every vine, every part of the property is able to show itself in its best light. And then us as stewards, both of us, we farm organically, we're biodynamic. You guys are, I know you're no-till and dry farmed. Those are both philosophies that require us to observe the vines and to understand and to interpret. And so in a year like what I'm so happy we're all sharing the 2018, and what I want everyone to remember about a year like this is that it allows us to see, it allows us as farmers to see the effects of our work and to understand the vines even better and to steward a wine through that's going to be as transparent as possible to this terroir, to this place. So what I see in the 2018 Quintessa is a direct representation of our soils. And I'm totally going to anthropomorphize this and say that there's these direct combinations. So I was talking about that big landslide off of the Vaca Mountain Range in those white soils. Well, if you get a chance, if you're tasting the Quintessa right now, or next time you get a chance to it, pay attention to the finish, to this incredible length and to a texture on the finish that is like fine grained chalk. That's the white soils. They have a tendency to have, these volcanic soils have energy, electricity, linearity, and this white soils have this fine chalky texture. It's almost texturally like Nebbiolo, but in Cabernet. Then you have the center. So those hills that were pushed up as a result of that landslide that have mixed volcanics and alluvium. These are red soils that are high in minerals. There's a lot of quartz and obsidian there. The wines from that part of the property show minerality, this tightness to their core. So that's the core of the Quintessa, that structure, the skeleton, what's holding it upright, and the intense mineral character and darker fruit. And then finally, we go all the way to the Napa River, and not to be forgotten, it's not as dramatic as some of the volcanic parts, but it's just as important. This, what we call loam. So this deep clay loam, well, that's the classic Rutherford dust character. So there's the cherry fruit, the upfront plushness, it's the flesh of the wine, and a dusty texture, for lack of a better word, on the tannins. And so for me, that's why I get so excited about a vintage like 2018, is that I can see the direct connection between the way the wine tastes and the way the grapes taste, the way the vines react on the different parts of the property.
Beautifully said. I know we're going to get letters from geologists, though. They're going to be saying, no.
Yes.
Vines do not
say the
soak up
minerality
minerals.
was literal.
They should be excited by Rebekah's excellent explanation of how hills end up on the valley floor, which is, as a little kid, I didn't know that. How did that hill come about? Yeah, it's pretty epic how they come about, which is pretty cool.
To imagine.
It is epic, and we should say that there are always geologists, as Rory and Rebekah are pointing out, hanging out in the Napa Valley because geologists classify soils into what are called orders, and there are 12 major orders in the world, and Napa Valley has 6 of them. For there to be 6 orders in a 30-mile long piece of land is astounding. So you can almost go down to Model Bakery and just trip over a geologist in a sense here, being fascinated by how amazing the region is. And Rutherford, right in the heart of all of that, is almost iconic in its diversity. Let's talk about regenerative farming for a minute and biodynamics, because I know that all of our viewers have probably heard those terms, but it may be hard for people to write a paragraph, let's say, on what they mean. So Rory, talk about sustainability and regenerative farming. What does that mean?
Well, it's a hot word at the moment, that's for sure. For me, I remember reading Agriculture, Steiner's original tract, and there was maybe just one line in it that really stuck with me, which was, it's a principle of sustainable agriculture, not exclusive to any one division of it, but just that concept that farming is a taking out. We're taking grapes out. Grapes are a version of energy. They're a version of they're an output. And your focus as a farmer has to be on, what can I return back to the soil, and the form of what that is, because I think that there's a way of approaching that is just, okay, what's the cheapest, quickest, easiest, what you might call the most optimal way of getting those inputs back into the soil so that I can get more outputs, that's the simple equation, basically, is how much synthetic nitrogen and how much water do I need to add back into this vineyard so I can pump out my high tonnage and get my Napa cab out of it. That's one way of approaching it, and it's a very profitable way of approaching it. But I think that a focus for my parents, and I know a focus for Quintessa for a long time, has been taking that just more than a step further and really thinking holistically about the farm, about maintaining the kind of energy balance within a farm. And you can think about that lots of different ways. For us, it is focused on soil health and keeping the soil fertility. You become a dirt farmer really more than you are a grape farmer. And thinking about testing our soil and going out there and digging into it and figuring out, hey, is this soil alive or is it dead? And I think that that's been the focus for me. That's always been the first principle of organic farming. It's not about what you don't do. It's not about not spraying chemicals or not doing that. Those are boxes you have to check to become certified organic with the US, with CCOF and the USDA. But the principle of organic farming is about that kind of that law of return. Basically, that's the guy who invented organic, Strobert Howard. That was his original term for it, was the law of return, of returning back into the soil what you take out of it. And that means life, for us, that's been why we've dry farmed. It's been why we've been organic for 30 plus years, is that it is a natural extension of our desire to do that. Certainly 30 years ago, being organic was not cool. We got mean letters in the St. Helena Star about it when we were just starting out. And nowadays that takes even we're still figuring out what we can do next. For a long time, dry farming has involved lots of tillage, and we have maintained a really, over 30 years of that, we've maintained what by all accounts, we come out and get it tested as a very healthy soil. But I know that we can do better, and so about half of the ranch is no-till at this point, no-till dry farmed, which is it's very hard to do. And we've been even in this year made me a little nervous for sure, because I've seen it not work. And so it's the idea of not adding irrigation back in and being able to leave the soil essentially undisturbed has been a major part of our challenge. And I credit my mom. This is her entire livelihood. This business tends to be all consuming. And so she thought I was pretty crazy when we decided to stop tilling half the vineyard. And this year wasn't the year to move the full vineyard there, but I'm definitely got my eye on it.
And allowing an entire ecosystem to sort of regulate itself in a way. And we've had some comments here from Sam and other people about pest control, but I think it's interesting when you see a vineyard that has been part of a philosophy, as Tres Sabores has for a long time. You could almost step into the vineyard and feel that it is its own organism in a way. Everything is working in a very natural and ancient way. I actually felt that way the first time I went to Quintessa too. I went there thinking, all right, I'm going to write about biodynamics. Damn it, what is it? And I was just struck by how I could somehow sense that this piece of ground was operating like a body. It just didn't want anyone to touch it. It was all right by itself in a way. I know I'm supposed to be better at this with words, but Rebekah, tell us about biodynamics, springboarding off of what Rory has just said.
Well, I love what Rory said, and I listened to you this week on the climate change.
Oh gosh.
Presentations too, but that the idea of biodynamics comes out of Rudolf Steiner's writings in the agricultural course. It's a philosophy, and it's the philosophy of thinking about the property or belief in the farm as an organism, as a complete organism that has relationship to the plants on it, the minerals under the ground, the animals, the people, and the cosmos. And that essentially, as Roy said, fundamentally farming is extractive. We are extracting the grapes, we are extracting energy out of the soil. So as the farmer, as the steward, it is our responsibility to try as much as possible to close that cycle, to bring back what we've taken out into it. And the idea of biodynamics is trying to close the cycle. So close the estate as much as possible. We are making compost from our own pumice. How can we encourage fertility naturally without outside inputs as much as possible? Understanding our estate, observing it, reacting to the changes. So as much as you might, as Rory said, as much as we might want to go no-till entirely this year, maybe the extreme drought year is not the year to make the transition. But listen to it. And I think that the beauty of wine is that wine has the ability to capture the character of a place, the soul of a place in a bottle. And biodynamic farming, regenerative farming, is a idea and a philosophy that the farm has a soul, has a character, has an estate. And so it makes sense for them to be together. And I think the proof is in the wine. And more than that, the proof is in the resiliency and the longevity of the estate of the vines. We are experiencing a change in the cycles right now, or climate change, or change in these cycles. How do we adapt? And I think from a biodynamic perspective, what we've been focusing on is understanding that the vines themselves, plants, have the ability to adapt. And if we listen to them, if we help them through, they'll be able to adapt. They'll be able to teach us how we can adapt to this. And look, we have a vineyard that was planted in 1990. About over 60% of this vineyard is original vines that for Napa Valley are old vines. Look, Rory's farming 50-year-old vines. I think that is, I just want to highlight that and congratulate you on that. The average age of vines in the New World is 15 years. That at 15 years old, you're just a teenager. So these farming practices obviously allow longevity and resilience in the vines, which is just going to make wines that have more character, more consistency, and more expression. So it's almost as simple as that.
And I think for all of us who are consumers, in addition to the, I don't know, the moral attraction of wanting the earth to be protected, there is this idea that the kind of farming that both of you do underscores a kind of aliveness. And I think you can taste aliveness in a wine. Or at least I think you can taste it when wines are pretty dead. One of the, in the early part of my career, of course, you would take notes, right? You'd be writing whatever, blueberries, cherries, so on and so forth. But I think now the first thing I look for is some hum, some sense of aliveness to the wine, regardless of what the flavors are. The flavors are going to be very different depending on the appellation and the specific terroir. But is there a, I don't know, a spirit there, a sense of that something is there? It's what we all really hope to find in great wine, right?
I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. I want to know whether I've ever had this wine before, and I'm excited when I haven't. And it's, if it's something that tastes the same as something I've had before, but shouldn't taste the same, it's from a totally different place, then that's always a little bit of a letdown. But I feel like when a wine has soul, when it expresses the soul of a place, it's like meeting a new person. And when it's somebody who you've met before, and you get to see them again years down the road, it's like meeting an old friend. And that's when it is transportive and really, 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 really special.
It is what historically caused wine to be the beverage of religion, right? This idea that there was a spirituality that other beverages, indeed other foods, didn't have. There's a not to get too way out there on it, but no, for people who do study wine and religion, it's a very important thread, the idea of transformation and spirituality and aliveness and all of those things. And even for the non-super religious among us, the spirituality of wine is almost undeniable, I think. Yeah. So Rebekah and Rory, wow, these two wines are so beautiful. I want to just spend our last few minutes here talking about their flavors per se. So I'm going to encourage you both to go back to the Tres Sabores with me first, and then we'll go to the Quintessa. I really do love this kind of California forest flavor in this wine. It's not rap music. It's not a loud wine. It's a very beautiful wine.
It's we have a pretty, if we get down to brass tacks about how we make it, it's all pretty gentle extraction in hand punch down. My mom goes out there and punches the bins down herself. And we've never, the house palate, I guess, what I grew up loving and what we always grew up, learning to love was this kind of softer profile to wines, and letting the my mom and dad were famous for handing out copies of the Tao Te Ching at winemaker dinners and talking about how the softness is hardness and things like this. And so it's which always kind of, it either blows your mind or makes you roll your eyes, but it's I think we always look to express our character, express what tastes like home to us through softness, through a lot more restraint, through balance. It wasn't a very cool way of making wine for a long time in Napa, but it's who we are and who we've always been. And so this this is a wine that, the 1999 version of this wine is what brought me back home. It's what brought me back to wine. I remember drinking, there was a frog leaf wine, but made just from these grapes. And I remember, good portion from these grapes. And that kind of wine that was a wine that spoke of home to me. I was abroad and had only been drinking Italian wines for about 5 months and getting yelled at in Italian for dragging the hose the wrong way. And I remember I brought one bottle of Cabernet that was largely from this vineyard with me, and had this moment at the end of harvest where I cracked it open, and it was that Napa is kind of speaking softly to me, but from 6,000 miles away. And I think that the idea of having a wine that doesn't have to be aggressive or macho or in your face and, big cab, registered trademark on there. It doesn't have to be that in order to speak over distance, over time. And I think that you'll get that with both of these wines. I think are speak softly, but carry immense weight and immense intensity.
Nicely said. Music isn't better because you play it louder.
I mean, it can be, if you're singing the right song, but
only
not
in the
always.
shower.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's taste the Quintessa. There's a beautiful polish to this wine on entry. One of the things I've noticed about Rutherford wines in this last week is that you get some of those powdery, like super dry, powdery tannins initially, and then the wine just sort of like a fan opens up into a sense of juiciness. And for a lot of other wines, it's the other way around, right? It's kind of juicy when you begin, and then it kind of collapses and gets dry. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I've been struck by the beauty of the finishes of these wines. And of course, the beautiful green tobacco-y flavor is always so seductive. Yeah, nice wine, Rebekah.
Thank you. Yeah, the green tobacco. I think that what you hit on, what you're talking about with the Rutherford wines and Quintessa and the Tres Sabores wines are good examples. They have structure and tannin, but it has a lift at the end. It has a lightness. I think that's, it's a small appellation, but it's a big appellation with a lot of diversity in it. But if we had to make a generalization, I think that's the combination of our soils, overall, the whole valley, but the climate as well. Being in the heart of Napa Valley, we are in a very privileged place climate-wise and weather-wise for Napa Valley, so that we have the influence of our soils and our geology, but we have the way the fog rolls in and the way the fog rolls out. So with the heat that we have in Rutherford, we don't, I guess, Rory, people can, but we have a natural ability to have a structured tannin that's not heavy and dense and hard. And so that's where you have this. If you taste all of the wines that we have in the collection and all the wines that you've been sharing this week, you see they're all very unique and they're different. But if you had to have a through line, I think you're very right. It's about those tannins and that finish. So maybe that's the Rutherford climate.
Oh, beautifully said. Well, speaking of the collection, I do want to say that tomorrow night at midnight is the absolute end moment when you can actually avail yourself, and your taste buds will thank you for this, of the Rutherford Dust collection. You can choose 6 wines, 12 wines, or I think even 18 wines. And I think there are some still packages available. And if you want to check those out, they're at www.rutherforddust.org /wine collection. I remember the holidays are coming. It would be pretty cool to have one of these on your table, or a bunch of friends and several of them on your table. So Rebekah and Rory, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. This has been, you've really both given me a lot to think about philosophically, and I'm really grateful for that, because wine is essentially philosophic in addition to being delicious. So congratulations on 2 beautiful wines, and thank you so much for joining me. Cheers.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Absolutely.
Cheers.